Council regular meeting to order. Everyone please rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Would the clerk please call the roll?
Councilmember Parker,
Present.
Hutchings,
Present.
Ruffridge,
Present.
Nelson,
Present.
Carey,
Present.
Chilson,
Present.
Student Representative Knowles.
Present.
You have a quorum.
Thank you. May I have a motion to approve the agenda and consent agenda? Ms. Hutchings. May I have a second? Thank you, Vice Mayor Parker. And Councilmember Nelson will have a request.
Thank you. And motion to add lay down action memorandum 2022-012, request for an excused absence from the May 25th, 2022 regular city council meeting for myself to the consent agenda as item 7C2.
Thank you. Are there any other additions?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, I move to add an executive session to discuss a property acquisition, which per Alaska Statute 44.62.310C1 is a matter if discussed in public would have an adverse effect upon the finances of the city of Soldotna, so may be discussed in executive session. The property acquisition executive session would be added to the agenda as item 12A to be addressed before the city manager's annual evaluation, which would then be moved to agenda item 12B.
Thank you, Mr. Rufford. Are there any objections to adding action memorandum 2022-012 to the consent agenda and adding executive session to discuss a property acquisition in the agenda? Seeing no objections, they are added to the agenda. Or would the clerk please read the consent agenda?
Approval of minutes, April 27, 2022, council meeting minutes. Ordinances for introduction. Ordinance 2022-015, accepting grant funds from the State of Alaska, Department of Military and Veterans Affairs, Division of Homeland Security and Emergency Management, and increasing estimated revenues and appropriations by $110,000 in the Parks and Recreation Capital Projects Fund for spruce bark beetle hazard tree mitigation. Introduced by the City Manager, set for public hearing on May 25th, 2022. Resolutions. Resolution 2022-021, authorizing the extension of the Facilities Management Agreement for the Visitors Information Center between the City of Soldotna and the Greater Soldotna Chamber of Commerce, introduced by the City Manager. Resolution 2022-022, authorizing the extension of the Memorandum of Understanding with Peninsula Memorial Chapel Management Company, Incorporated, regarding the operation and use of the Soldotna Community Memorial Park, introduced by the City Manager. Other items, Action Memorandum 2022-011, request for an excused absence from the May 25th, 2022 regular City Council meeting, introduced by Councilmember Chilson. Action Memorandum 2022-012, request for an excused absence from the May 25th, 2022 regular City Council meeting, introduced by Councilmember Nelson. And that is your consent agenda.
Thank you. Are there any public comments on any of the items just read by the clerk? For those participating through Zoom, please raise your hand, and if you would like to comment, app users by pressing the raise your hand button, and phone participants by dialing *9 on your telephone. I see no one here in the council chamber wishing to speak on any item. And looking at the attendees, I see by Zoom, I see no raised hands. So we are back on to having no one wishing to speak. The approval of the agenda and consent agenda is back before the council. Are there any council objections to approving the agenda and consent agenda? Hearing and seeing none, the agenda and consent agenda are approved. Move on to item 4, public comments and presentations. Items other than those appearing on the agenda, 3 minutes per speaker, 20 minutes aggregate. Are there any members from the public who would like to speak on any item not appearing on the agenda? For those participating through Zoom, please raise your hand if you would like to comment. App users by pressing the raise your hand button, and phone participants by dialing *9 on your telephone. I see no one here in the chamber wishing to speak on any item. And looking at Zoom, I see no hands raised. We'll move on to item 5, Assembly Legislative Report. Are there any representatives from the borough or state in attendance who would like to speak? For those participating through Zoom, please raise your hand if you would like to comment. App users by pressing the raise your hand button, and phone participants by dialing *9 on your telephone. I see no one in the chambers, and I see no hands raised by attendees on Zoom. We'll move on to item 6 in the agenda, public hearings, testimony limited to 3 minutes per speaker, and that'll be ordinance 2022-013, repealing and reenacting Soldotna Municipal Code 1.08.080, minor offenses fine schedule, and amending sections of SMC Titles 1, 8, 13, 15, and 17 to update definitions and standards for certain violations, fees, and enforcements. Introduced by the city manager. May I have a motion to enact?
Motion to enact 2022-013.
May I have a second?
Second.
That was by Mr. Ruffridge. Thank you. Report from the administration.
Thank you, Mayor Whitney. I'd like to ask John Zarneski, our Director of Economic Development and Planning, to provide the report.
Good evening. Thank you. First, I should apologize for the length of the ordinance. I hope there hasn't been a record set, but there is a lot of information to cover, and I'm going to cover some of it. I'm not going to go into the details that are provided both in my memo and in the memo that's provided by our attorney, Mr. Casciola, and he also provided a sectional analysis. I won't go into that, but I will cover some of the basics and certainly make myself available later for questions. So this is our repeal and replace ordinance. It involves the update of our minor enforcement table and the corresponding sections of code. The process for enforcement of our municipal code does not change at all under this amendment. Only the fines listed in the table and the specific language that corresponds to those fines within the code are modified. The table itself is lengthy and looks lengthy. I should point out, though, that when we started this, we had already 114 violations listed in the table before this amendment. We've now have 153 if this is approved, so that's a change of 39. The new offenses that were added to the schedule are administered by a number of different departments within the city. So there's about 20 of them that were added through the planning department, 17 that were added through utilities and public works. Parks added a handful, animal control, and SBD also added some fines to the schedule. There were also just a couple of changes to the actual fine amounts. So there were, of the 100 plus fines, there were 7 changes to the fine amounts that were either increased or decreased in the table. So the why behind this, I thought Charles Casciola, our attorney, did a really nice job in his first page of his memo, and I'm just going to read this one sentence because I think he says it perfectly. He said, "The rules are intended to secure simplicity in procedure, fairness in administration, and the elimination of unjustifiable expense and delay in the adjudication of low-level violations." We're trying to be more effective and efficient with code compliance through this ordinance. They provide us, this minor offense citations provide us an opportunity to resolve issues quickly, saving on staff time and resources, and potentially on the legal expenses that would be associated with any kind of civil action that may be undertaken. We've got some past experience in dealing with these. We've issued 2 to date, 2 minor offenses, at least this is the planning department only, have issued 2. The one I want to share with you is, I think provides an illustration of why this is important to have minor offenses as a tool in our toolbox. In May of 2020, we began contacting a business owner for illegal signage. We contacted and wrote letters, actually, we wrote letters 8 separate times, and this continued through December of 2021. We also had numerous emails, phone calls, and site visits to this person. Finally, we ran out of patience in 2021, and a minor offense citation was issued. We worked with SPD to have that citation issued, and the next day, the sign issue was corrected, and we have not had a single issue since. That was a good example of cat and mouse type games that occasionally occur in enforcement, and where a minor offense citation cured that situation. So with that, I want to share with you a little bit about the process that we go through with regard to enforcement. And again, we're not recommending any changes to the process itself, but I think it's important to share with you how it works and what's behind each issue. It's also important to let you know that we are not proposing to change how we work with landowners and business owners. Our goal is always to achieve code compliance without any type of enforcement action. We work closely with landowners and business owners to do that. So we typically hear about violations one of two ways. The first one would be we get a complaint, a phone call, a letter, or someone actually filling out our complaint form. The second way is we find out about them. And that sometimes happens when we have things like we know that there's activity going on in a building, and we know that there's not been a permit issued, whether it's a building permit, a zoning permit, or other forms of permits. But when we receive these complaints, our first thing we do is we review our code. We perform a site visit or a drive-by, and in most cases, these violations are very obvious, and that's why we get the phone calls in the first place. So you drive by, you see it. If we do see it, we start a file. We get the process started. We contact the business owner, or the property owner, and we share with them the complaint that we received and the codes that may be involved. At that point, we'll follow up with what we call a notice of complaint. It's a letter that says, we received this complaint, we talked with you, we'd like to resolve this without going any further, and we provide them a short time period to correct the violation. Once that time period is passed, we do a reinspection, and if all is solved, we say thank you very much. We write them a letter and letting them know that the file is closed and all is well. If the problem still exists, then we move on to the official start of enforcement proceedings, which is a notice of violation. And that notice does a few things. It serves to provide notice that the enforcement process has started. It shares with them the specific code requirements and the sections of code that are being violated. It'll set guidelines for, or I should say deadlines for compliance, and it'll provide for an inspection. And again, after the time frame has expired, we'll go back and look and see if it has been fixed. If not, we move to the next step. If it has been corrected, we again send a thank you letter and close the file. So the next step is what we call a final NOV, and during this time frame, as much as 30 to 60 days may have passed at this point, depending on the type of violation and what our code requirements are as far as allowance for the curing a violation. And again, with a final NOV, it's very similar to the other one I just mentioned. You send it certified mail, you inform them of the problem and the code requirements, give them a deadline, and ask for their cooperation. At that point, after the time period has expired, if it has not been solved at that point, then we sit down with the city manager and we have essentially two or more options, the two most common ones being a citation could be issued if it's in fact in the minor offense table, or we pursue civil action and start working with our attorney. So again, what the ordinance before you does is improves our ability to use the minor offense citation tool by expanding the table to include additional common violations. The other thing I briefly wanted to mention is when someone does get a minor offense citation, what it is these were born out of a traffic citation, so it's a standardized form that the Soldotna Police use. It's given to the person, and they are then given within the form. It states how they fix the situation, and basically what it says is you have 30 days to either pay this online through the Alaska court system or you appear in court. And in most cases, our attorney assures us, and it's been our experience so far, the fines have been paid and the issue is resolved. Rarely does it go to court. If it does, then the city needs to also show up at the court at the date and present our information, our facts behind the violation. But that is the process in a nutshell for violations. I hope, if nothing else, you understand our process a little bit more. And I know that, like I say, the ordinance before you is long, so when we get to questions and comments, I'd be happy to answer your questions, and that's the end of the staff report.
Thank you for your report. The public hearing is now open. Are there any members of the public who wish to speak on this item? For those participating through Zoom, please raise your hand. If you would like to comment, app users by pressing the raise your hand button, and phone participants by dialing *9 on your telephone. I see no one here in the council chambers wishing to speak. And looking at Zoom, I see no hands raised. We're back before the council. And are there any council comments? Ms. Hutchings?
What is an unlawful garage sale, since I never have garage sales?
I would have to look at the code. It's not a section of code I look at very often, but there are some standards with regard to the advertising of garage sales, for example, where signs can be placed for them. And I believe there's also some standards regarding repeat garage sales. So if they occur every weekend for all summer long, I believe that would be a violation of our code.
Thank you.
Any other council comments? Vice Mayor Parker.
Thank you, and thank you for all the work that's gone into this. I know it's not something that you've done overnight. So camping more than 30 days, is that camping in a tent? Can I camp for 29 days in my RV? Is it on my property? Is it on a city street, park?
Thank you. The camping violation that's referenced there is in a number of our zoning districts where camping is listed as an allowable use, provided it doesn't extend more than 30 days on the property. So a property owner within, for example, a rural residential district could have friends, relatives, neighbors themselves set up a tent, set up an RV within their property for not more than 30 days within the calendar year and camp. Beyond that, it would not be allowed. We have had a few instances in the past where we've had people set up RVs and essentially live in them as accessory structures. And we have, in a couple instances that I'm aware of, have pursued those as far as violations and worked with the property owners to cease the camping and find alternative housing or alternative campsites for the activity.
If I could do a follow-up.
Go ahead.
Thank you. So if I've camped in it, but then I leave, go away, and leave it on my property because I need to keep a place to store it, it's okay to store it there, right?
Absolutely.
And then I come back the next year, I can camp in it again for 30 days again?
That's correct. Yeah, it's one of those things that can be hard to interpret as far as whether something's being lived in. In the one case that I do recall here most recently, it was obvious that someone was living in it based on the furniture that was outside the camper, the power cords, the hose connected to it. Those types of things were the things that we'd be looking for to determine whether somebody was actually living in it.
Mr. Rufford?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The fine schedule, is there rules about what our fines can and cannot be in our city code? Some of them seem low considering the offense, and some of them seem maybe high considering the fact that maybe they would never happen, but I don't know. Thoughts on the fine schedule?
Sure. I can tell you that, right, some of them are low, and they are hopefully intended to correct a behavior, a low-level, infraction, and encourage compliance. Where they increase are situations typically where someone may be able to profit from not following the code. So, for example, if someone is illegally hooking into our water system and using it as part of their business, or just cheating the system, that would be an example where we would want to see an increase in fine where someone can't profit from or shouldn't profit from violating our code. Many of these, though, are not related to that, whether it's having an animal that's running loose at the campground, for example, would be something that, okay, it's going to cost you $50, and hopefully that's enough to get you to put your dog on a leash. So that's the general background. I'm not sure how some of these fines have originally been set. But in general, it's the higher the fine, it's really to discourage behavior that may result in someone profiting from avoiding the law.
Just a quick follow-up, Mr. Ryan.
Go ahead.
So I guess the one that maybe jumped out at me right at first was just an issue that we've had in the past, and maybe it's toned down quite a bit since we were in that season, but the dust control situation. That is one where it seems like persons could profit from using some of the mechanical devices that we've asked people not to use. And then it's just have we ever fined anyone that you're aware of for the dust control sweeping issues? And maybe that's just gotten better and we don't need to talk about it, but just a thought.
Yeah, thank you. And so no, we have not fined anybody under dust control, but we are very happy that this is, if approved, we would now have the capability to do that. They are not presently in our fine table. So this is an addition. The other thing to mention about these fines, these are daily fines, and so it is possible to fine someone multiple days. So if we observe someone breaking the law on Tuesday, we can issue them a ticket for that violation on Tuesday, and if they're back out there on Wednesday doing the same thing, we can issue another ticket for the same violation. So it is possible to have to fine multiple days, not on the same ticket, but we can issue multiple violations.
Ms. Queen?
Thank you. Mayor Whitney, I was just going to add on to that. Mr. Zarneski mentioned it earlier, but it's really the fine revenue is not what we're after, but it's the correction of the violation. And for whatever reason, this methodology of issuing a ticket has proven much more successful than the series of letters with escalatingly larger font, and then the last one is bright red. So really I think we probably have not spent as much time really scrutinizing the individual dollar amounts beyond trying to get something that felt reasonable, because ultimately it's that behavior that violation that we're seeking to correct through this process. Thank you.
Mr. Carey?
Thank you. Just a question dealing with garage sales. If let's say, a church on the inside of the building contained only within their own parking lot off the street, if they had an ongoing garage sale over weekends, do I understand, would that be illegal?
I would have to look into that, but also, I should point out that, most of our violations are complaint-driven. Garage sales is not something that we're actively looking for, but I can certainly get with you after the meeting and review the code and check with you on whether that type of operation would be in violation of the code.
I'd be very interested in that discussion. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Mr. Nelson?
If you were just to look at this table that we've been discussing, I mean, several pages here of different violations and things, and I definitely recognize what Ms. Queen is saying on we're trying to correct the behavior, and you may not have this information at your fingertips, but I'm just curious, do you have an estimate on how many things that you may get that are complaint-driven that are resolved before we get this process? I heard you say that, voluntary compliance is certainly preferred, and I just, for somebody that's looking at this, I think it's my knowledge that most of this gets done long before this happens. But do you have any numbers for that, for how many informal complaints you had or anything like that off the top of your head?
Thank you. No, I don't have numbers, unfortunately. I can tell you, just within the last week, I've been dealing with 3 violations. One, I think, would be well-suited to a minor offense citation. Another one was resolved with a phone call, a visit, and very cooperatively, and are taking care of things. So it varies, and it certainly this time of year, too, a lot of activity begins, and we and the snow melts, and a lot of things are exposed. So it really does vary from the type of violation and the kind of cooperation we get from the landowner. But unfortunately, I don't have any good numbers for you.
And that's fine. It's not necessary to follow up. I guess I just wanted to make the point that I think I'm trying to make is that, as you just said, you're not out there trying to look for things as a city, that you're dealing with things voluntarily. So if you look at this table, it almost looks like we've got a squad of officers out there, which is not true. So just for the benefit of the public, I guess I wanted to make that point clear.
Any other questions or comments from the council? I do have one brief one here. I'm going to guess we have some kind of an exception in here for the long-term campers that are parked next to the schools during the summertime. They're kind of like caretakers there. And I've seen them. I'm assuming they're still doing it at the school district. And I'm thinking we must have some kind of an exemption for that.
I know Ms. Queen wants to respond, but I also believe they're in a different zoning district that allows more than, that doesn't have that restriction of 30 days. So schools are within the institutional zoning district, not one of our residential districts, and we don't have that restriction.
Thank you, Mr. Zarneski. That was the point I was going to make, is that each of these specific fines is attached to a section of code that already exists that establishes what's allowed and what's not. The 30-day camping limitation and actually the garage sale example, to my knowledge, are both focused on residential districts where the intent is to not allow a residential district to turn into an ad hoc business through a loophole of calling it a garage sale. Or in the case of camping, it's health and safety related, as well as trying to encourage camping in those areas that have already been designated for camping, whether it's a different zoning district or a place where that activity as a campground has been permitted. So I think some of the examples we gave tonight are not broad citywide, but a specific to a very specific zoning district, and I know at least those two are referencing our single-family, two-family residential districts.
Okay. Thank you. Ms. Hutchings.
I see one of them that says use of leaf blowers for moving particulate matter. So I see a lot of leaf blowers when our different landscapers go around and take care of different businesses, and they've got their leaf blowers. So what is the designation? I mean, are you talking about a big leaf blower or just a small one, or how does that work?
Thank you. And again, this really requires you to look back at the specific section of code. And in this case, the dust requirements are for commercial lots. And whether they have a 1 horsepower or 5 horsepower leaf blower, it doesn't matter. What we're trying to avoid and what's spelled out in the code is that the condition where you get a large amount of suspended matter in the air that potentially can have health implications. So it's fairly well defined in that code with regard to the activities are prohibited. It doesn't specify the type of leaf blower that is or isn't allowed, though.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions, comments? Seeing none, I will call for the vote.
Councilmember Hutchings,
Yes.
Ruffridge,
Yes.
Nelson,
Yes.
Carey,
Yes?
Chilson,
Yes.
Parker,
Yes.
Student Representative Knowles.
Yes.
You have 6 yes votes.
The ordinance 2022-013 passes on a 6-0 vote. Move on to the next item. It's ordinance 2022-014, increasing estimated revenues and appropriations by $22,325 in the general fund for fees associated with the collection of remote seller sales tax by the Alaska Remote Seller Sales Tax Commission on behalf of the city of Soldotna, introduced by the city manager. May I have a motion to enact? Mr. Carey.
Mr. Mayor, I move the adoption of ordinance 2022-014, increasing estimated revenue and appropriations in the amount of $22,325 in the general fund for fees associated with the collection of remote seller sales tax.
May I have a second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Mr. Ruffridge. A report from the administration.
Thank you, Mayor Whitney. We discussed this topic at the work session in the context of FY23, but the same is true in the current year we're in. Whereas we, when preparing the FY22 budget, we estimated online sales tax collections at $250,000. We are now projecting that through the end of the year we'll be closer to $425,000. Therefore, the fees associated with that collection they're higher than we had previously budgeted due to that additional revenue. Therefore, the ordinance would appropriate $22,325 additional dollars as the fees associated with that increase in revenue. And that concludes my report. Thank you.
Thank you. The public hearing is now open. Are there any members of the public who wish to speak on this item? For those participating through Zoom, please raise your hand if you would like to comment. App users by pressing the raise your hand button, and phone participants by dialing *9 on your telephone. I see no one here in the chambers wishing to speak on this item. And looking at Zoom, I see no hands raised. So having no one wishing to speak, well, the item is back before the council. Are there any council comments? Seeing none, we'll call for the vote.
Councilmember Ruffridge,
Yes.
Nelson,
Yes.
Carey,
Yes?
Chilson,
Yes.
Parker,
Yes.
Hutchings,
Yes.
Student Representative Knowles.
Yes.
You have 6 yes votes.
Thank you. Ordinance 2022-014 passes on a 6-0 vote. Moving on to new business, first item will be Resolution 2022-020, setting the rate of levy for property taxes for the city of Soldotna at $0.50 for the 2023 fiscal year, introduced by the city manager. May I have a motion to adopt? Vice Mayor Parker.
Thank you, Mayor Whitney. I move Resolution 2022-020, setting the rate of the levy for property taxes for the city of Soldotna at 0.5 mils for the 2023 fiscal year.
May I have a second? Ms. Hutchings. Thank you. A report from the administration.
Thank you, Mayor Whitney. We, at the work session, presented a biennial budget adjustment. That budget was prepared based on a mill rate of 0.5, which is the current mill rate, and the historical rate over the past several years. At this point, we did not recommend any change, and that concludes my report.
Thank you. Are there any members of the public who wish to speak on this item? For those participating through Zoom, please raise your hand if you would like to comment. App users by pressing the raise your hand button, and phone participants by dialing *9 on your telephone. I see no one in the chamber wishing to speak on this item, and looking at Zoom, I see no hands raised. So the matter is back before the council. Are there any council comments? Mr. Carey.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I would move to amend ordinance 2022-020 and change from 0.5 mils to 0.1 mils in the title and throughout the resolution as it would appear. And if I have a second, I'm hoping to speak to it.
Is there a second for that motion to amend?
I'll second.
Thank you, Mr. Ruffridge. Go ahead, Mr. Carey.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Today, we had an excellent work session dealing with, again, the biennial budget and, again, the revenue that the city has. Last year, I tried to do away with the property tax as a whole, and there were numerous members of the council said, no, if you get rid of it, it'll be so hard to put it back in. Seems to me we should be taking taxes that we need rather than those that we've done for a long time. What was also presented to us, and again, we passed a resolution here earlier, is just from out of area sales tax in terms of people who buy, we're going to take in more revenue from that than this entire property tax brings to the city. For next year, again, we're talking about a 12% increase in revenue. We are a very stable city. We are extremely fortunate with the amount of revenue we make from property tax, a great deal. This accounts for maybe 3% of our budget. I would like to do away with it, but I understand I won't have any votes for that. Excuse me, I do not, it will not pass. So what I'm hoping to do is let's reduce it then. If the issue is if we get rid of it, we can't bring it back, it'll be too difficult. Okay, that's a reasonable perspective for someone to have. So instead, can we reduce it then? Can we reduce this so that business owners and individuals who do have to pay property tax in the city will pay a little bit less? And again, the effect of this on our overall budget is relatively negligible. We take in very little from property tax. And we have so many other areas that are doing so very well. It was reported that even during COVID, we still kept making a larger amount of revenue than we had the previous year. And so I'm hoping that this amendment that the council will consider, that we can lower the amount of property tax from half a mil to 1/10 of a mil. Thank you, and I hope people will consider this resolution, this amendment, excuse me.
Any other comments? Seeing none, I'll call for the vote.
Councilmember Carey,
Yes.
Chilson,
No.
Parker,
No.
Hutchings,
No.
Ruffridge,
Yes.
Nelson.
No.
You have 4 no votes.
The amendment to Resolution 2022-020 has failed on a 2-4 vote. Moving on, any further discussion on the main motion? Seeing none, we'll call for the vote on the resolution.
Councilmember Nelson,
Yes.
Carey,
No.
Chilson,
Yes.
Parker,
Yes.
Hutchings,
Yes.
Ruffridge,
Yes.
Student Representative Knowles.
Yes.
You have 5 yes votes and 1 no vote.
Resolution 2022-020 passes on a 5-1 vote. Moving on to the next item on the agenda, and that will be item 8, Mayor and Council reports. Mayor's report. A couple of things. On Friday, Ms. Queen and myself and Mr. Cornelis had a very informative and very good discussion with former Governor Walker in regards to issues and things going on in the city of Soldotna and our future plans and what we're looking at. As I said, it was a very, very productive meeting. I expected it would probably last about 30 minutes, and it ended up almost 2 hours. And Governor Walker said we're an example that he would like to use of forward-thinking communities that have plans and have a future that they're looking to improve our community. And like I said, it was very excellent. So my next item here is I'd like to thank the staff, Ms. Queen, Melanie M. Holt, and all the department heads for all the work they did in putting the budget together. It was a very informative budget. It was very, I'd say, conservative. I think we're doing, the council's doing an excellent job, and the staff in holding down expenses, some of those that we have no control on, unfortunately, gas and things like that, snow removal this year. So it's very, very good, and I thank you very much. Last item, shopping bags. We passed an ordinance, or ordinance, I guess it was, banning plastic grocery bags. And I can understand some of the issues during the pandemic and shipping problems and stuff like that. But in shopping at some of the stores recently, I see that they have not only the plastic bags, but they also have the regular paper bags. And so I'm kind of wondering if they've kind of forgotten or lost sight of the fact that the plastic bags are not supposed to be used in the city. So hopefully the administration can take a look at that and see what's going on. And Ms. Knowles, this is her last meeting, and she's had a very, hopefully learned a lot, learned something at least from this group, and we appreciate very much that you participated, and I hope to see maybe you back here next year. But thank you again for your service, and we really appreciate it. And that would be all I have. We'll move on to council reports on boards and commissions. Soldotna Parks and Recreation Advisory Board, Mr. Ruffridge.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. As per usual, I always struggle to attend my ex officio duties, and thusly I have no report for that.
And I can understand, I was planning on attending the meeting myself, and well, things happen. We'll move on to item 9 on the agenda, and that's report from the city manager.
Thank you, Mayor Whitney. A few things to report. Breck had provided a laydown memo for the council members tonight about the Spruce Bark Beetle ordinance. Tonight, you introduced in the consent agenda ordinance 2022-015, which would allow us to accept a $110,000 grant from the state. Between last Thursday when we built this packet and Monday, our team worked with the state and received an amendment from them to increase that grant amount to $165,000. So that paperwork is already in hand and the ink is dry, and at the meeting at the public hearing in 2 weeks, we'll ask you to amend that dollar amount. And that's based on us finding more trees in that category we described than we originally thought. So excellent work by our team, and really appreciative of the state for their responsiveness. I wrote 3 letters of support for the Chamber and Vision Soldotna for their pursuit of the 11 AMP grant funding. As Shannon described, this next 3-year tranche of funding. 3 letters because as the partner of the city, I generated a letter of support generally for that program. One that provides them access to our facility so they can demonstrate they've got facility control and use throughout the summer. And then the third is an in-kind matching document that outlines the different financial in-kind services that our parks employees and waiving the fee of the facility rental generate for them. So I was happy to provide that as I've done in years past. I did, following the school board meeting, if you recall, I had sent a letter about pool fees as they were looking at that facility use, and I did get a call the next day back from Kevin Lyons, who's the facilities director with the school district, following up to let me know that the district is happy to work with us on our needs for programming community schools classes in the pools. So although we didn't strictly fall in under the categories they outlined, he's happy to continue partnering with us as we do with them on various things to make sure that we can hopefully get some reasonable fees moving forward so that we can, again, when we start back up with community schools classes, offer things like kayaking and safety-related courses in the pool. So that's good news. Finally, Mayor and I had a quick phone call with the principal at Soldotna High School, Sarge Truesdale, who had reached out to engage with us about police officers in the schools generally, and had very good conversation with him about the importance of youth interacting with officers, opportunities for different criminal justice courses to be taught at the high school, and just overall the benefits of having a presence between our public safety officers and our youth. And we let him know that we were recruiting for the police chief position, and that I felt that both of the candidates we were considering would be excited to engage in that discussion when they come on board. So to be continued. So that was a good conversation. I'm glad he reached out to us. And when we get the new chief on board, we'll continue to explore how best to make those connections within the community. And I thank you. I think that concludes my report.
And thank you for remembering things that I forget. Any questions for the city manager? Seeing none, we'll move on to item 10 on the agenda, public comments. Members of the public will have 3 minutes to comment. Is there anyone from the public who wishes to comment? For those participating through Zoom, please raise your hand if you would like to comment. App users by raising your hand button, and phone participants by dialing *9 on your telephone. I see no one here in the chambers wishing to speak, and looking at Zoom, I see no hands raised. So we'll move on to the next item on the agenda, council comments. Ms. Knowles.
Earlier today, the Soldotna City Council attended the KPBSD Soldotna Council School Board Representative Conference, which was hosted by Nikiski High School, and we all shared ideas with the other members of Student Council throughout the district, sharing ideas on how we can better our schools and our district, as well as electing representatives that speak on behalf of our schools. There were 8 positions available, and half of those positions were filled by Soldotna High School attendees, including Ashley Dahlman, the school board student representative, Kiara Fortner, the Wellness Advisory Board student representative, Emma Knowles, the Information Board Committee student representative, and Maya Mead, the Fine Arts Board Committee student representative. Graduation will take place on Wednesday at 6 o'clock, and I just wanted to say thank you for the opportunity to be a part of these meetings and share with my school all of the important things that you do here.
Thank you very much. Mr. Ruffridge.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just want to say thank you. This grant amendment for the hazard mitigation, I just think that this is shows how hard our administration is working on these issues. That is just fast and incredible. Government never moves that fast, right? So I think I agree with Governor Walker that maybe people could take notice of the work these fine people do. Thank you.
Mr. Carey.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I felt our work session today was excellent. I greatly appreciate the information that was provided. And equally important is the environment in which we have these work sessions. They are so totally open. They are appropriate and respectful. I can't imagine that anyone on the council would ever be restrained from bringing up an idea, even if they felt others would not necessarily agree with them. I think that's what democracy in America is supposed to be about. I just wish, and again, I know if you have a lot of people here, it normally means they're mad at you, but I wish people could come and see the working of the city council and these work sessions, and again, our city council. This is the way it's supposed to be. And I greatly appreciate everyone. To the best of my knowledge, we all respect each other, and that really helps. We have a good administration, we have good staff, we have all kinds of good support people, and so it is really a pleasure to come to extraordinary work sessions as we have at different times again. And again, I just greatly appreciate the environment that I find that we have when we do that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Carey. Ms. Hutchings. Ms. Hutchings.
No comments.
Mr. Nelson.
And no comments either, thank you.
Mr. Chilson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I had the privilege today to attend the Joint Chamber Luncheon where they are awarding scholarships that were provided by the Chamber for local youth in the community, in addition to the Caring for the Kenai Award ceremony for the top 12 finalists in that program this year. And I just have to say, it was highly inspiring to see the kids that were taking that stage and just seeing the next generation come forward and the ideas and passion that they have for their community and their home, and just making just not only the environment, just the community as a whole, making this a better place to live. And hearing them share their stories about where their next journey is going to take them, and all they want to learn, and that they want to come back and bring that home and make this a better place. It's just that commitment to community, again, through caring for the Kenai, Student Representative Knowles, her year here serving with us. It's just very humbling to see the commitment that our next generation is putting forward into our community, and it gives me great hope to see where things are going. This next week, we're going to have our graduating class of 22 is going to be graduating across the school district. And, we all know this has been a rough couple years for our high school students, and I'm so proud of where they have been, where they are going, and just what they are going to be bringing into our community with years to come. So I just want to put that on the record.
Vice Mayor Parker.
Thank you, Mayor Whitney. The work session today was a great work session, and I want to commend the city manager and our finance director for the work that they put into not only the original biennial budget, but the modifications for this upcoming fiscal year. And I know as we wrap this up for FY23, Melanie's going to be reaching out going, okay, it's time to start working on the next 2-year budget, folks. So that's right around the corner. I did notice in town that the streets and sidewalks are looking great. Yep. So the crews have done a great job in getting the gravel and the sand and the dust all picked up, and thank them for doing that. As was mentioned, the fact that the state of Alaska was able to, working with the city, be able to amend the appropriation and increase the funding, since we doubled the number of trees that need to be removed, is outstanding. And when you are talking with the state and this division, please let them know that not only do you appreciate it, but the council members appreciate the swiftness in which they were able to act. And finally, to Councilmember Knowles, it's been a pleasure having you with us, and I look forward to seeing you in the future as you embark on additional activities. So congratulations, and we will see you around.
Thank you. We'll move on to the next item on the agenda, which is item number 12, executive session. And it will be two parts in the executive session. A is property acquisition, AS 44.62.310C1. A matter, if discussed in public, would have an adverse effect upon the finances of the city of Soldotna. And Part B will be city manager annual valuation, AS 44.62.310C2. If discussed in public, may prejudice the reputation and character of any person. In accordance with Alaska Statutes 44.62.310C1, the City Council may convene into an executive session to discuss a matter that the immediate knowledge of would clearly have an adverse effect upon the finances of the city. Also, in accordance with Alaska Statute 44.62.310C2, the City Council may convene into an executive session to discuss subjects which may prejudice the reputation and character of any person. May I have a motion to enter into executive session? Vice Mayor Parker.
Thank you, Mayor Whitney. I move to enter into an executive session to discuss a property acquisition and the city manager's annual evaluation.
May I have a second? Thank you, Ms. Hutchings.
If I could continue.
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah. Mrs. Queen is elected to have the discussion of the city manager's evaluation take place in executive session. The portion of the executive session to discuss the property acquisition will include Mayor Whitney, the city council members, city manager Queen, Public Works Director Cornelius, Economic and Planning Development Director Zarneski, and interim city clerk Hewitt. The portion of the executive session to discuss the city manager's evaluation will include the mayor and city council members. The city manager will be included when the council requests her presence. We will take a brief break between the two executive session items so that change of city personnel and attendance can take place.
Thank you. I was just quickly moving along here. Now I'll take a second. And again, Ms. Hutchings, thank you. For those attending through Zoom, the Zoom meeting will not be resumed after the executive session. After the executive session is over, the meeting will briefly resume at soldotna.org/streaming. Thank you.
So move.
Thank you, Mr. Ruffridge. May I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Nelson. Are there any objections to convening back into regular session? Seeing none, we're back in regular session, and on to the next item on the agenda is 13, meeting announcements. May 25th, 2022, City Council meeting at 6 p.m. here in the chambers. And having no further business in front of us, meeting's adjourned.